everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Alexandra Greenberg, and this is Insight into Wellness. And today's topic is a microbiome deep dive, understanding how our microbiome plays an important role in our mental and physical health. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Piper Dobner. She is a naturopathic doctor in Portland, Oregon, and she has worked in the microbiome space since 2017. Her focus is gut health, specifically specializing in microbial therapies. As a co-owner of the local stool bank, Flora Medicine, she provides a unique perspective based on her clinical experience and expertise with fecal transplant. The magic of this therapy, combined with the massive toolbox of naturopathic modalities, makes her practice special. Thank you for joining me, Piper, Dr. Piper.
Thank you for
All
having
the
me. I
things.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I like we just spoke about before I hit the record button. So excited about this conversation. Our microbiome, poop. I'm just gonna go out there and say it.
Yeah.
So exciting. So exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, the world of poop is very fascinating. I'm always happy to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think my the biggest little, when we're texting, I often text about poo, and so I always use the poop icon. I love it. Smiley face. It's the way to go.
Oh yeah, we have one on top of our hood in our lab where we make our product. So
Perfect.
always smiling back at us,
Perfect. I really like to start off conversations just focusing on you as a healer and just asking, were holistic practices a part of your childhood, or did this come later in life?
That's a good question. I think holistic practices were inadvertently a part of my childhood. We didn't have, growing up prior to the Affordable Care Act when, you didn't have to have insurance. We didn't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times if we got sick, it was like, deal with it and make sure you get better because we can't take you to the doctor. And so, I think that we employed a lot of natural therapies in that regard, but it wasn't intentionally natural, if that makes any sense at all. I think later in life, in high school, I had really bad eczema in my arm folds and in the knee folds, and I would wake up scratching and bleeding because I had scratched so hard during the evening when I would sleep. And I got to college and I was kind of reading through some research and found out that maybe grains could be part of that problem. Maybe it could be gluten. And so I ended up taking out grains and my skin cleared up. And I was like,
Wow.
yes, I was so excited because it's very uncomfortable for all my eczema people out there. You hear me. And since then, I've been able to reincorporate a little bit of gluten here and there, especially if I do like fermentations with sourdough and things of that sort. But clean eating, it can make a huge difference in your life. So
Yeah, I think it's always important to kind of dispel, like, all healers have not always been healers, and sometimes we really have to heal ourselves to find our journey in life. I know that happened to me. So,
yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing. Mm-hmm.
I'm really passionate about guiding people on their journey and helping people, and I know you are too. What really sparked your interest in working, maybe more specifically in with fecal discussions and help? But what kind of guided you on your path to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I've always had a fascination with the gut and with nutrition. I just seeing the power that nutrition can have in people's lives and their ability to reduce medication dependence and things of that sort was really powerful. But, you know, FMT is a totally different beast. Its potential is vast, but what we understand about it is actually not as vast as we might think. So it's an interesting field, and it was probably my second year of school. I met a colleague who was working with a practitioner locally. Dr. Mark Davis and Dr. Carmen Campbell were kind of the pioneers as naturopaths who were bringing FMT to the field, and they kind of helped me get into that clinic and start working with those doctors. And I was like, this is fascinating. I mean, you could see a patient's picture flip in 24 hours or 48 hours. And those types of healing modalities, you know, in the naturopathic world, we're often like, it takes just as long for however long you've been chronically ill, it takes about that much time for you to heal. So you have to be patient. And with a therapy that you don't have to be as patient with was really exciting.
Wow.
And not that I don't appreciate patience in the healing world, but it was really cool to see some of the quick turnarounds, and especially in the mental health sphere. Since opening our practice in 2018, you know, I've had a couple of patients who had pretty severe depression coming in with C. diff, because C. diff is really the only way that you can have access to fecal transplant in the United States. And so
Really?
yeah, there's a lot of interesting FDA guidance around it. And so there's a discretionary enforcement that allows FMT to be used if you have failed standard therapy twice. And so that means you have to go through multiple rounds of antibiotics. You have to have failed. You have to have your diarrhea recur. You have to test positive again. And then you can qualify for FMT unless you're part of a clinical trial or a trial that does an investigational new drug therapy.
Okay.
Which is where a lot of the research from FMT is coming out of, is a lot of these different trials are studying FMT for things like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, or help with cancer therapies and things of that sort. So
Can you just let everyone know, C. diff, it's an excess of diarrhea?
yeah, so C. diff generally comes on after antibiotic exposure.
Mm.
So, you know, I've had patients who had a sinus infection and they were given an antibiotic and then suddenly they developed really severe diarrhea. I've had patients who went in for a root canal and were given an antibiotic and they suddenly develop C. diff. I have patients who were on cancer immunotherapies, and part of that therapeutic was a low dose antibiotic, and they eventually developed
Mm-hmm.
C. diff. And so C. diff is a spore forming bacteria, and it's very, very much so a issue in our elderly population, but also
Mm-hmm.
becoming much more rampantly spread in younger people. We're starting to see it in, you know, teens and 20s and 30-year-old individuals, because the spores don't actually wander out. So there was a study that came out in 2018 of hospital sheets, and they showed that 60 to 80% of the spores are still maintained after industrial wandering.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super scary. So
Wow.
the hospital itself can be a nesting ground for the opportunity to get C. diff. And I had a patient who had a motor vehicle accident and went to the hospital to get treated, and then acquired C. diff in the hospital.
All right, my friends, people listening, friends, family, preventative medicine, natural medicine, let's do it.
Yeah.
We're all in. We're all
Yes.
in.
There's so many other
Um,
ways to treat other than an antibiotic. They're great. They're great. And I'm
mhm.
not saying that I wouldn't give it in any circumstance, but there's so many ways we can stimulate the immune system and take care of our bodies and trust that our immune system's strong enough to take care of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Paint us a picture of what it's like for you to use your own modalities, your own healing, and maybe not exactly FMT, but how have you healed yourself? I am always interested talking to healers on what happens when you're not feeling well. What teas are you drinking? What are you doing with your own body, and how do you heal yourself?
I love that question. I am a big fan of tea when I'm not feeling well. So cold and flu season, I always have echinacea tea or echinacea elderberry or a cinnamon or a licorice, something that's really good for the immune system. I always have that tea in my cupboard so that I can boil some water really quick and drink, 3 to 6 cups, depending on how I'm feeling. And then my other favorite is honestly hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy is the use of water to transfer heat or cold, right? So hot or cold therapy, and it's a contrast therapy. So
Mhm.
if I'm like feeling feverish or sick, I will brew up a real hot cup of echinacea tea. I'll even boil some pots of water on the stovetop, and then I'll hop in a bathtub and make it really, really hot. And I'll drink my hot tea in the hottest water I can tolerate until I am dripping sweat. Because when you think about that mechanism, if we're going into a fevered state, the reason we have a fever, and fevers are so amazing. I like always want one every year. I'm like, give me a fever. I'm a naturopath. That's what I wish for Christmas. I'm like, give me a fever. But But it's really cool because that heating up process is really to stimulate all of our enzymes to start functioning a little bit more quickly. And we need them to function quickly so that we can really bring that mass attack of our immune system out to be like, hey, foreign invader, we need you out of here. And so one of the beautiful things about taking a really hot bath is you kind of take that burden off of your body to have to heat itself, and you're doing it externally so your body can fight the infection. And I usually do that. I'll finish with a cold shower, and then I wrap up in a bunch of blankets. And at night, you know, if I'm feeling sick, I'll put, I do my warming socks, which are cold, wet socks that you put on your warm feet at night before you go to bed. And then you cover them with dry wool socks. And that's really my go-to. Like if I'm not feeling well, or if I start feeling like I'm getting a cold, I'm like, it's time for some warming socks. And I'll do that, and then I'll drink my teas. And those are kind of my standard go-tos. I've always got vitamin C on board. I've always got vitamin D. There's lots of different ways. And sometimes I get overwhelmed with all the options because I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so many things I could do. What are my go-tos? And really it's tea and hydrotherapy.
Love. And, you know, there's something I haven't gotten too much into the feet. Maybe the next person I need to talk to is on feet, but there's so much happening with our feet.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's a humunctory, right? It's like a map of our body on the foot. It's crazy.
Yeah. So your work is to get to the root cause, the root symptoms. How do you start to do this with your clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an art. This is where I think the art part of medicine comes in. And it's really about creating a relationship and rapport with the patient and making sure that there's a level of trust there where we can go deeply into some of the darker crevices. Because you know, there are definitely times where patients come in and I'm like, this is 100% structural, and we need to figure out the physical aspect of what's happening. But I'd say 95% of the time, it's a deeper emotional root issue. And so it's really about getting to that level of trust and then having those deeper conversations about, you know, what are you holding on to? And what are the things that happened to you when you were younger that created these protective mechanisms that you haven't been able to snap out of? And that's really where my practice takes a total 180, and I use a bunch of homeopathy and herbs and low dose herbs to really start treating the mental emotional sphere and using those herbal allies in a way that people can find deeper healing.
And, you know, we know that emotions lodge themselves into the body, and it really does become a mind-body healing process.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like I'm doing my work if we don't address the mental emotional sphere of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this question I've been so excited to ask, and I really think it's so important for everyone to start to take their own health into their own hands. There's really specific tests. One of them is a fecal test that people can take, endocrine tests, hormonal tests. What do you think are important things that everyday people can start to ask their doctors for, and maybe not get every answer, but start to really understand their body on a much deeper level?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a twofold answer. Testing is one part of that equation. And I often have patients who come in with the gamut of tests and they still don't have answers from tests. So, I mean, I go back and forth in the testing world. I really, I've started diving into what's called the organic acid test, which can give us a lot of markers around how we are metabolizing different things and how those metabolites are showing up in either high proportions or low proportions to show us whether or not we're metabolizing well. So that's one component, and I appreciate that. But it really depends on the patient, and that's a really hard question to answer in terms of like which test is the best test. There's like so many functional GI panels out there that you can run a stool culture on, and you can get all these assessments. And I go back and forth on how I feel about those, because a lot of them make inferences about, you know, like you have a high percentage of this form of bacteria, and therefore you have a higher potential to have rheumatoid arthritis later in life. And it's like, I don't like that. I don't like imprinting potential outcomes, because then people can become really fixated on that. And so I do take testing with a grain of salt in that regard. I think the GI map test is a fun one to look at, but again, I take it with a grain of salt. I like the doctor's data comprehensive analysis. I think that one's just fun. It gives us a lot of markers of how people are digesting, how their pancreas is working. I think that's really important information. We use a lot of Vibrant America in our stool bank. That's how we test a lot of our donors. And one of the reasons we use them is they do polymerase chain reaction, so we can see PCR analysis of who is there and whether or not those are potential infectious agents. So that's a really important part of screening donors for our bank.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of testing, there's so many out there, but my kind of blanket recommendation is just get your annual lab work done and have a sense of where your body's at. Like, you don't need something fancy that is a functional GI panel or a functional test from your, functional medicine doctor. Get your standard CBC, look and see what your blood looks like. Does it look good? Are there indicators there? If so, let's go down that rabbit hole and figure out what's going on. Get your CMP, which is your comprehensive metabolic panel. It gives you a nice broad overview of how your body is metabolizing sugar, how the liver looks, how the kidneys look. If there's something there, dive a little bit further. I love testing the thyroid and making sure that the thyroid's healthy. I think that's a often overlooked, beautiful little gland that sits right here. And it does a lot for us. And I think that just having a good baseline of, what do your lipids look like? What does your standard inflammatory marker look like? I think that those tests in and of themselves are most important, because
Mm-hmm.
once you have an idea of, I eat this way for 12 months and my values change just a little bit, maybe I should be changing that, or maybe I'm doing it right and I need to keep doing it that way. So I'm a fan of people staying up to date on their tests just to make sure we don't miss something along the way. Because when we talk prevention, those early changes in numbers are really where we're going to have the best success in treating.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. I think it's so important to just understand where your body's at, just like you said. And then also getting your doctor, if you're not already seeing, I love how you also say naturopath. If you're not already seeing someone who will give you the time and break down your results, make sure that you're reaching out to someone who is and who is
Yeah.
able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the big things I always, anytime I'm working with a patient autonomy is so important to me. Like, you're the driver of your own ship and you're the person who gets to make all of your medical decisions. And I have a lot of knowledge and I'm happy to share it with you, but I'm not the person living in your body every day. And I'm not the person who's having to deal with the ebbs and flows of the life that you're living. And I can help you with that and I can help you function through that. But ultimately, it's your life and you get to be empowered to live it the way you want to. And I'm here to support you and make sure that if I think you're making a bad decision, I'm going to let you know that. And
Hmm.
if I think you're making a great decision, I'm going to keep supporting you and cheering you on.
Yeah. And that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's our path. It's our
Yeah.
path. Just finding it, no big deal.
Right.
Um, so let's kind of take our deep dive into the gut. We say things naturally, like, oh, gut feelings or gut wrenched, or I've got butterflies in my stomach. We are so interconnected to our gut. Would you give us a sense of what is our microbiome? Just let's start right there.
Great. So the microbiome is basically all the bugs that live in and on us. The fecal microbiome in particular is the mass array of bugs that inhabit our large intestine. These bugs are so insanely important to our health. It's crazy. We need them, and we need them in large number, and we need them in diversity, and we need a lot of different players to make sure that we are living the best, happiest, healthiest life we can. And what's really cool about working in the C. diff space, which is that post-antibiotic diarrheal infection, is that I see patients who have gone through multiple rounds of antibiotic therapy, whether it's for a sinus infection or whether it's
Mhm.
for Lyme treatment or whether it's for their cancer therapy or whatever it ends up being that they've had exposure to. You can see through that timeline different degradations that start happening in their body. And it's so fascinating because once they've had multiple, we call them perturbations to the microbiome, but basically chopping down parts of the rainforest that's in our gut,
Mm.
we start to see really interesting neurological responses. And there's a 2-lane highway that really intersects between the brain and the gut. And the gut is constantly talking to the brain, and the brain's constantly talking to the gut. And that pathway is so insanely important because it gives us sensory signals. Like you said, like gut feeling, like, oh, I just feel it in my gut. It's like, yeah, it's intuition, but it's also like your gut is sending that signal that's like, danger, or something's not right, or something's off, or I'm getting like my spidey senses out. And so it's, it's a vast network of little tiny microscopic beings that want us to be happy and healthy because they thrive when we thrive.
Mm. How does our food intake, our lifestyle, how much is that affecting our microbiome on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, it's everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everything. I have conversations with patients about this all the time, where the most important thing that you can eat every day is colorful vegetables. The different colors, so the phytonutrients that come out of those vegetables feed different parts of our microbiome. The fibers that get sent into our digestive tract, they are gobbling that up every day. And what's great is that we think of them as our poop, like the microbiome is what comes out in the poop, and that's how he can analyze the microbiome. But they're in our digestive tract pooping for us. And their
Mm-hmm.
byproducts, so the things that they're creating when they're gobbling and they're digesting and then they're sending out their excretory products, those are things that are basically precursors to things like serotonin. They create tryptophan. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. Serotonin is our happy hormone. Like 90% of that comes from the gut. And it's funny because we think about serotonin as a neurotransmitter, but I'm like, is it a neurotransmitter, or does it actually come from the gut? Because
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that too. I've had a couple of really significant depression cases, and I love working with mental health because the gut is central. And when we're talking about gut health and feeding that microbiome and making sure that we get the proper components from those bugs, not only is diet so important, but in 2019, there was a landmark study that came out that basically showed a majority of our pharmaceuticals cause significant perturbations to our microbiome. And a lot of those are SSRIs or antidepressants. And I'm like, when we know that the microbiome is so intimately linked to brain health and mental health and our emotional health, why would we take something that's going to knock it back? Why wouldn't we do something to grow it and expand it and give it the ability to diversify itself in a way that's going to support us?
Yeah.
So I have a very different approach to mental health.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an entirely amazing, different conversation on the why. And
Don't flush. It'll be part of the Don't Flush series, right?
yeah, yeah. Just let everyone know we're gonna be working on a wonderful series one day, all about our poop, and it's coming at you quick.
Mm.
Hopefully not C. diff style though.
No, 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 not C. diff style.
Yeah. Um, so one thing I know it's huge right now, this hot topic, probiotics. Other than FMT being the super probiotic. What is your take on probiotics? I've heard people say it's not worth taking them because they just flush right out, and you actually need to build basically a community. And then there's different types of probiotics. There's more, a life culture, or there's a supplement. What is your take on probiotics?
Oh man, I go back and forth on this. Probiotics are hard. I have seen them be really, really helpful for patients, and I've also seen them do nothing for patients. All the different strains and all of the different combinations of strains and all of the like, this is the best, and this one's the best, and this one's the best. It's hard because our microbiome is really a community of communities. We have what are called guilds that form inside of our microbiome. So we've got different species of bacteria that like to link together and make the same product. They all are like, okay, we're going to be the butyrate producers. And butyrate's basically this really beautiful compound that feeds the cells of our colon. So they provide fuel source for us, right? Like that's pretty cool. But that community needs different components to feed it. And a lot of times it's like, especially working with patients who might have a little bit of a lower income, to me, I would rather them save the $60 on this schwanky probiotic and instead go spend that money on an organic or biodynamically raised vegetable basket for the month and do their best to eat as many different fibers and cook foods in as traditional method as possible. Like I'm often recommending Sally Fallon's Nourishing Traditions cookbook, because it's a great book to kind of teach you some of the more ancient methods and techniques of soaking your grains and soaking your rices and making sure that you're getting all the nutrient profiles from beans if you're going to eat beans. And to me, getting those natural fibers in through well-sourced foods, not only is that going to feed your microbiome, but the more that we vote with our dollar at the supermarket, my hope is that with every patient that I get to talk to, as they start making better food choices, as they start shopping with their dollar, our dependence and need to start using things like pesticides in our environment would significantly decrease. We've been seeing an exponential rise since 2010 with things like glyphosate, and seeing the significant impacts that those pesticides have on our body. It's devastating, and our earth is struggling because of it. And so all of the impacts that you can make, I'm like, buy the probiotics, sure, or go support the food system that's actually going to support you and support a better environment and create an ecological system that we can all live and thrive in. And so it's a hard question for me, because I'm like, go buy some sauerkraut and make your own, or not sauerkraut, but go buy cabbage and make your own sauerkraut at home. And then you're going to get all of the good yeasts and bacteria from your local environment, which is going to help support you in that environment, because those are the species that live there. As long as we haven't eradicated them with the amount of chemicals we use in the environment at this point, so it's a double-edged sword, but I generally push my patients to focus more on getting their fuel from their food sources and trusting that their microbiome is going to benefit from that. And then if you buy food like that, you don't have to wash it because it's in really good dirt, and then you're getting the dirt bacteria anyway, so you kind of get a natural probiotic.
Hey, natural.
All about it.
Yeah. While you were talking about that, I just had to take a really deep breath and let it go, because there's so many people that don't, like you said, that may not have the money, that may not have the opportunity to even shop organic. And if we can work to still buy vegetables, still buy, like you said, beautiful colors, and start there.
Yeah.
Start there.
Start there. And you don't have to be fancy. You don't need to go buy a fancy supplement. There's so much you can do in your everyday choices that can make a significant impact in how your body responds. And I just, I always have to weigh that, because it's a different conversation with every person who comes in the door, and really meeting them where they are and making sure that they get the best in the environment that they're in is so important.
It's a bigger, just stepping back, it's a bigger conversation. Again, these are all so layered. But just
Always.
asking people, and even myself, I ask myself to just slow down, take a moment. I think, we're so geared up right now around the world that slowing down can be one of the daily challenges. But just taking a deep breath, taking a moment, and giving a good thought to what decision are you going to eat for lunch? What decision, what are you going to make later today? What decision is going to help you?
Yeah. And then, like, going back to slowing down in general, I mean, when we talk about the nervous system connection to the gut, there's a really beautiful picture that came out of San Francisco, and it was like, the ultimate like nerd photo competition of how, like, who takes the best pictures of the microbiome. And one of the pictures that was taken it was through UCSF, and I believe it was a woman who took it. But it was a thick mucus layer in the middle. And then on one side, there were all of these colorful bacterial strains. But then on the other side, there were these kind of dark blue immunoglobulins from our immune system. And that thick mucus layer, which was like a really beautiful fluorescent green, that is modulated by our nervous system. So when you're stressed and you're running and you're financially stressed and you've got kids to pick up and you've got all these things on your to-do list and you're like, how the hell am I going to take care of me today? That layer starts to thin, and it starts to get thinner and thinner. And then that protective barrier becomes much more penetrable. So we have more communication from the microbiome in a way that we might not actually want. So taking that time to slow down has serious physiologic implications, because, you know, even if you're running like crazy and you're stuck in traffic and the person in front of you is just like not driving fast enough and all those feelings are boiling up in your brain, it's like, I often have patients take a sticky note that says, take a deep breath, and have it right on the middle of their steering wheel, because those are the moments where you could really impact your microbiome in a negative way. So it's like, okay, I'm going to breathe in through my nose for 4 seconds. I'm going to breathe out through my mouth for 6 seconds. I'm going to take in the sights around me. I'm going to remember that I get to live in this body, in this life, and I'm grateful for it. And we're going to figure out from there what needs to be done, but I'm going to deal with traffic in that way. And so, yeah, it's really important to slow down. I'm really glad that you said that, because I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. And you had mentioned it briefly, but you know, natural healing takes time. And sometimes we don't think that just breathing is a cure, and it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm always giving breathing exercises. I'm like, okay, your month is all about breathing. And my
Yeah.
patients are like, seriously? And I'm like,
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
drinking water. Drink your
Yeah,
water.
yes. Oh my gosh, drinking water. I have right
Yes.
now, I'm going through a cleanse, an Ayurvedic cleanse. So lots of eating, porridge, easy to digest items. And I have a timer that goes off every 15 minutes to remind me to
Yeah.
drink water all day long, people.
Yep. You got to do it. It's so important. And I'm like, especially when we're talking socioeconomic status, it's like this, to this point in time, is a free resource, right? Like,
Yeah.
we aren't, hopefully we're not buying bottled water. If that's the situation you're in, then, you know, be careful, because there's plastics that get infiltrated into the bottled water. And then you've got a bunch of other environmental toxins you have to start detoxing out, which isn't fun. And that's another, oh man, access to care issues are all over the place in this conversation, for sure.
So much to talk about. Well, I wanted to take the rest of our time and to kind of talk about poop. Let's
Yeah,
talk
let's
about
do it.
fecal am I pronouncing this right? Microbiota.
Killing it. Sounds
Yeah,
great.
transplants. Let's
Yeah.
I know that's kind of more of the end of the spectrum, really. You know, like you mentioned, you have to go through many steps to even get that, according to the FDA. But I just talk to us about poop.
Poop is my life. Yeah, I love poop. Fecal transplant is really fascinating. I actually think that if we could get to a point where people could get past the ick factor, I really would love to see that become the future of medicine. In terms of individual care, you know, there are times where we need an antibiotic. Say we have a really severe pneumonia and we're having a really hard time, you know, getting on top of it immunologically, and we need to go to the hospital, and you need to have those antibiotics. But what if you had collected a sample of your stool when you were healthy? You had it stored in your freezer. You take that antibiotic. You feel crappy after the antibiotic, because most people don't feel great after an antibiotic. And then you take your own stool and your microbiome's right back to where it was. Like,
Beautiful.
it would be so beautiful. And I'm
Beautiful.
like, think about that for a second. Like, ecology restoration at its finest would be, that would be my dream for the future of FMT.
I
But
love that dream.
thank you.
I
Yeah,
love
I
it.
do too. Yeah, we'll dream it together. We'll make it happen.
Okay.
But yeah, I just think that FMT is really powerful, but it also comes with its own slew of big questions that we don't have answers to. We kind of like to talk about it as we're at the tip of the iceberg with FMT, and we know it has powerful implications, and we know that it can be a miraculous therapy for some, but we also have no idea how it works. FMT was kind of fast-tracked through the FDA through this discretionary enforcement, because patients were seeing such significant results. And now that we have research backing it, we know FMT is 96+% effective at treating and curing C. diff. I think the technical term now is it's best at preventing C. diff.
Okay.
They don't want to say cure with it anymore, but
Thank you for your technicality.
yeah, I'm here for you. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of that, like whenever we have C. diff patients, I know that I have the therapy that's going to help them. And that's a really nice back pocket toolbox. For other patients who are wanting this therapy, you know, we have seen in some trials with ulcerative colitis that some people can take FMT and they can go into disease remission. And that's about 30% of ulcerative colitis patients. And That's not a huge percentage, but for the percentage that it affects, that's everything to them. And so having access to that therapy in that way seems really appealing. But there was a researcher, his name is Dr. Cook, he's out of Ireland, and he spoke at the Madrid conference for the microbiome this year. It was all, online and live because of COVID. But he spoke, and I thought he had some really eloquent ways of describing some of the problems with fecal transplant. And one of them is we really don't know what's going on, and we don't know what we don't know. And fecal transplant, although it has some really significant implications, I liken it to an organ transplant. It's really taking somebody else's biome and completely substituting your own for theirs. And whether or not that's a good or bad thing is hard to know, right? Like when we talk about ecosystems in terms of ecosystems biology, we've got different ecosystems. We live in the Pacific Northwest, which is much different than the tundra, or much different than the desert, or different than, locations down in South America. Like there are different ecosystems for different areas, just like we have different ecosystems as humans. And Dr. Rob Knight out of UCSD, he's like this big microbiome junkie down there. I love listening to him talk. But he did a TED talk, and he was like, with the Human Genome Project, we know that our genes match by like 99.5%. Like we'd sit in a room with everybody. Doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter where you came from, our genes are all going to match pretty closely. But if they analyze our microbiome, there are going to be people in that room who have 100% difference in their microbiome compared to you. And that's crazy. And when we start thinking about taking that difference, that 100% different microbial makeup, and putting it into your system, is that really the best decision to make? And for some people, when they're dealing with C. diff and they've had diarrhea for weeks and they can't maintain weight because they're losing weight, they're losing hydration, they're in and out of the hospital for dehydration, it's an easy answer for them. Like, absolutely, hand over the poop, I'll swallow it, no big deal. But for other people, right? Yeah, hand it over, give me the goods. It's really fun talking. This is my favorite dinner conversation. But for other people where it's like, I'm a naturopathic doctor, and so is it really your microbiome that needs to be completely switched out? Or are there things that we need to do with your lifestyle? Are there things that we need to do to deal with mental health disparities? Are there things that we need to do to ensure that you're having good access to foods? And, I want to make sure that all those baseline indicators of health are covered. And usually when we start working down that path, FMT becomes kind of like well, maybe I don't need that. And it's like, no, you don't need that. There's so many things that we can do day to day to support the microbiome that we live in and on and with.
Yeah.
They're symbionts with us, and they love us just as much as we love them. And sometimes we get some that overgrow and we need to deal with it, but we can get that. We can take care of it.
Yeah, it's very cyclical. Coming back to the
Very.
beginning, coming back to the beginning, coming back to you. And just a quick note, we've got just a few minutes left over. You're not just digesting poop. It has been cleaned and all
Yes.
the things into a small pill and filtered
Yes.
out. And
Yeah, so like a quick rundown of the process is that we do a double centrifugation cycle. So we get a donation from a donor that we have screened, and we have very strict screening criteria. So that's hard. We call our donors unicorns. They're the special unicorns that we find with their magical poop. And then they send their poop to us, and then we basically put it into a blender and we make it into a slurry, and then we send it through a centrifugation process to pull out the fiber. And then we pour off the liquid and we respin the liquid, and that gets compacted into a microbial pellet. And then that liquid gets poured off, and what we're left with is like juicy bits of goody microbes. And then we resuspend that in a cryoprotectant to keep the bugs from degrading in the freezer. And then we pipette them into little pellets, and they're triple encapsulated. And we triple encapsulate because we know that 2 layers of gelatin capsule can survive the acid bath of the stomach. And then that leftover capsule can get you to the bottom of the small intestine. And then
Wow.
they're opening around the bottom of the small intestine or in the large intestine, which, the SIBO world of people freak out because they're like, oh my gosh, are we going to get SIBO from it? I've never seen SIBO come out of FMT, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. I haven't seen it personally in clinic. But yeah, it's pretty clean. They're white caps, you swallow white caps. Most people are like, are you kidding me? You're going to make me eat shit. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have you swallow a capsule that looks like a white capsule. But if you want to think of it as eating shit, go for it. Like, I don't care.
Maybe that can be the name of our little podcast, Eat Shit.
Eat shit. Oh God, I love that. Yes.
We're going to have so much fun.
I'm stoked. I'm so stoked about this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an amazingly deep, packed conversation. If you would like to mention anything to any listeners, feel free.
Great. Well, thank you, Alexandra. I really appreciate it. This has been so much fun. If patients are interested in chatting with us, you can go to floramedicine.com. That's our clinic. That's our stool bank. If we have any listeners who are super healthy, awesome, vaginally birthed babes, submit a quiz on our website, and we can potentially onboard you as a donor. We love onboarding new donors. So any interest there, we're happy about. And then, take care of yourselves. Do something to make yourself laugh every day. I think that's really important.
Lovely.
Yeah.
All right, you unicorns, you heard it.
Yes.
On paper, they are interested in your poop. Thank you so much for joining me today on Insight into Wellness. And you can listen to this and more at GreenTreeAyurveda.com. Speak to you next time.